We have people.
Maybe that's what they were waiting.
That's what we were waiting for. It's just for me to hit the start button. So sorry, just to say, Kevin, I'm sorry for keeping you waiting if you were waiting, but glad you have joined us when you have. And to say welcome to another Network-Centric Resources online discussion featuring resource developers sharing hard-earned knowledge and lessons learned. For those of you that are joining us in the Hangout, which looks like it's you, Kevin, firstly, we want to say, Kevin, you are like outside somewhere. You look great. Thanks so much for joining us. Just to say, please stay on mute. We'd invite you to participate by using the text-based chat room for communication. You can start this by clicking the icon in the upper left-hand corner, and then in the text message box that appears on the right-hand side of the screen, go ahead and type hello and introduce yourself. If you can do that, it looks like you're on a phone. If you have a question during the Hangout, you can please type it in the text message box, and we're going to pause a bit later and answer them. As well, feel free to share any comments that you might have there as well. So just a reminder that this Hangout is being broadcasted live on YouTube, which is also now appears to be including the chat room. So don't type anything there if you don't want it recorded for posterity. A recording is going to be made available on YouTube immediately after we are done. So I'm your host. I'm the Fab Writer in Fab Writers. We work to build capacity to use tech and data to strengthen advocacy and humanitarian efforts. Our Network-Centric Resources project aims to learn from those that are developing people-powered and participatory resources through sharing ownership, enabling contribution, and supporting collaboration. Joining me today is Maya Richman, who I am proud to say is an active member of our network of network-centric resource developers, and who acts as the engine room's techno queen. So first of all, Maya, I just gotta comment on the job title. It is fabulous. So tell us, what does the engine room's techno queen actually do?
Yeah. I put that in my job description sort of as a joke, and then it got okayed, and so I got business cards with it. And yeah, the Techno Queen is responsible for a lot of things related to internal strategy around security and technology implementation, but also I do direct support with organizations and activists over long periods of time to help them strengthen their security culture and generally increase their tech intuition.
Very good, cool. So let's to shift into the Responsible Data Forum. Can you tell me a little bit about what is the Responsible Data Forum and how has that evolved into what it is now?
Yes. So the community was first convened in 2014 with an event with Aspiration Tech. They helped design and lead the first forum, which is an event that happened in Oakland. And since then, a lot of diverse institutions and individuals have come through and joined the community and really pioneered responsible data practices in their own work and communities. And it's been a really like a decentralized effort for evolving the concept and the practices. And responsible data is about thinking about how we can consider unintended consequences of using data and the kind of work that we're doing. The fields are pretty diverse. Like data is something that pretty much everyone who uses a computer for their work engages with. And so the responsible data community is a place for those in the social change and advocacy field to really think about practical approaches to addressing ethical changes. So it's just grown since 2014.
Yeah, actually, I was realizing that I have two of my own examples of responsible data stuff. So I was fortunate in that I was at that first one in Oakland, and in 2014, and we had a session there about questions to ask frequently when collecting data from marginalized communities, which has been like what was really nice is, you know, we had that session there, and then the people that came to that session, we continued to collaborate and then produced a blog post, right, on how to do that. So that was super helpful. And I don't know if you actually realize this, Maya, but the Network-Centric Resources Project is actually an evolution out of the Budapest Responsible Data Forum. I started working on something there with Kristen Anton called the Responsible Resource Creator Manifesto. And that really helped me in getting thinking about, what does responsible resourcing look like, and eventually morphed into what is now the Network-Centric Resources Project. So anyways, lots of stuff with fab writers, but of course in us working with other people. And of course I run across stuff all the time that, has been spurned, like projects that have come out of the variety of different responsible data events and things like that. So yeah. So,
totally. It's just like a seed that has been sowed, and there are champions within so many organizations that are pushing forward big changes, like within Amnesty, within Oxfam. And yeah, it's like we're just daily inspired by what people are doing out there.
And also I have to say, because I'm working on a project right now with the International Federation of the Red Cross, and there's a big responsible data bit in there that has drawn a lot from resources that have come out of that as well. So there's lots.
There's an active community, and it just keeps growing, which is really nice to see.
Yes, indeed. So in terms of I think the forums, the events themselves really helped sort of spurn a lot of these desperate or different projects going out, and people had ownership of it and all that. So you guys all saw that happen, and then decided that you needed to do some more stuff around what you were doing. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
About the redesign?
The redesign process, what you guys went through.
Yeah, so the redesign process started last year in February or so, and it was a collaborative project. So there were a few other organizations that were tackling a different aspect of responsible data needs. And our goal was the redesign of the website. But with that, we really wanted to take stock of where is the community going? Like, we didn't want to just put some gloss on the old website. We wanted to really reconsider and reinvest in what is working, what isn't working, and get really deep into the weeds of things. So yeah, it was almost a year-long process of going through, talking with people, then moving into design, and then going back to talking to people. And we can talk more about the specifics of the process. But
yeah, actually, I'd love to hear. So what was the initial set of questions like when you went out and wanted to start that learning? What were you actually asking people?
Yeah, so some things we asked were, how did you find responsible data? How did you arrive at this community? Because we were keen to see how we could bring in folks that could use responsible data but don't know about it, or just try to find out how we could support others' aims of people we don't normally talk to. And then also, we asked questions like, how have you engaged with the tools and the resources that people have developed? That's something to say, we know we've been publishing them, but that's a different question than, are you using them and how are you using them? Another question we asked was like, what is the most useful content for you? So there's a lot of content on the website, and we wanted to get to the nuggets, the golden nuggets, because maybe those are ones we can highlight more, reinvest in, and just generally use that as a frame for what does this community crave and want and need. And then we got into more governance questions around like, where do you see this community going? What kind of clarity or understanding do you have about who runs it or who is part of the community? And that's where we started to get into these kinds of almost philosophical discussions about what it means to be a part of the community and where we see that going.
But I think that stuff is really critical because it is the bit, because I remember, I had lots of questions in terms of, these projects that I had started, like, was I supposed to run with each of these on my own, or what I mean? Was I supposed to be completely self-motivated? Was I getting support? You know what I mean? Like all that was all sort of a bit murky.
Totally.
And I think you guys did some work on sort of defining that better for people.
Yeah, definitely. In an effort to not take up too much space or not control the conversation about what happens next, we sort of left people in a limbo, and that's what we realized after the user research phase, is that some people didn't feel they had the authority to go on and keep working on things, or those were just questions in their mind, and they wanted some kind of governing body or some kind of authority to kind of outline how they're supposed to relate to the content and what their expectations were and things. So it was a well-meaning idea to kind of leave it ambiguous, but the end result was that the resources were not as invested in as we hoped.
And so what steps did you take to sort of deal with all that?
Yeah, well, we tried to be a lot more clear about the fact that the engine room is currently managing the website, managing the listserv, what we call stewards of the responsible data project or the responsible data community. So rather than putting us in a line of logos with other organizations saying, no, we are managing this, but also making it really clear that that's something that we see as flexible and as sort of a definition of what's happening right now, but not a prognosis for the future. And what I mean by that is that we see ourselves as community stewards, but we also know that there are a lot of organizations and individuals out there doing the work. So we just want to support the site so that we can point towards their work and kind of create a space where everyone working on RD is just as visible. So we fully imagine a time when we won't be stewards and we'll pass on the reins of managing the website and all of the pieces that come along to another organization that's keen to take on that responsibility.
That's great, and I think that's actually one of the things that I within our network centric resources project that I'd love to be able to drive home, which is having that clarity in terms of what is your role, but also being clear. Like I think you guys have understood that people aren't just going to pick up and run with this stuff on their own. They do need support. And so if the engine room didn't do it, right, it would all just sort of fall apart. And that's not to say anything negative about the people that are participating, right? It's just that understanding of like where people's priorities are and what they are able actually to do.
Yeah. I mean, I would take that to more of like a even more general sense, which is like any community of people that come together around a resource. Like there needs to be some kind of clarity on who is managing that resource, and we aren't the ones doing it because we're like the best for the job. I think it's just kind of naturally coalesced that way because of the history. But I guess to say that I'm sure there are people out there, part of the RD community, who really could do this, and it's not a magic skill set. And I think that it's been like an honor to be a steward for the RD community.
Yeah, no, good. And I think, and that's the piece too, is that people need to understand how important having a governance structure is around a resource, and having clarity both in terms of, who's owning it, what the expectations are, and then also what are the various roles. So, and the thing that I really appreciate about what you guys have done is you've learned that, right? I don't think you had that sort of clarity. I'm saying you, but I don't think the engine room had that clarity when it started. but it was very willing to learn as people came and interacted. And then as part of that process that you guys went through, right, you really learned what that meant and how important it was to be able to put that stuff out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
What other lessons did you learn from doing the redesign
Yes.
that would be helpful for us all to know about?
Something that I'm really proud of, which is not the most obvious part of a redesign process, which is the actual writing of the new content, because the website obviously looks different, and that's very exciting. But I'm really proud of what Zara and Laura and Alex and many others did to kind of really dig in and try to reinvent how we talk about RD, make it more accessible, make it more understandable and clear, because the old website, not the resources, but the kind of about information and who the community is, was really academic sounding. It was really stuffy, and I think it left out a lot of people who otherwise might have been seen themselves as part of the community.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Yeah, so that was a really exciting thing to learn, that like that content and the way that we had written it was somehow distancing people from the, because we had seen it so much, we got so used to it, we thought everybody gets this, right? And then talking to people who were new to the community, who SimLab brought in some folks to us who hadn't been part of the community before, so they had some fresh eyes on it. And they were just like, what are you all talking about? And that was a really frank and really nice insight.
So what was the kind of content? Do you remember, like what
I
threw
mean,
people?
everyone can go and see it on the Wayback Machine, but it's just a lot of words, a lot of really long sentences. And we had also kind of been coming from this academic background, like as researchers in this way. And so it makes sense we'd write that way. But yeah, we kept going through it time and time again. Like it was several months of hacking it all up and building it from the ground again. Yeah, and I'm really happy with the results, because I think the site now acts as a 101 resource in itself, because it so clearly outlines what responsible data is and who the community is, some of the community. So that's something that I feel like very proud of from this redesign.
And I have to say too, like if in terms of the aims for this, right? Like most of us are working sort of cross-cultural, regional, global. Like we're trying to bring very different actors together in order to do that sharing of knowledge. And so when you're talking about developing resources that people are going to be able to build off of, like you really got to think about the essence of what you're trying to convey and making it like as simple as possible. And not in the like dumbing it down, but really making things very concise and clear and all that. Like that's really critical to get out
Yeah.
there.
And I think it's a significant improvement from where it was, but that's not to say that it's perfect. So, like I mentioned in the emails, we're really keen to hear how people find the new site, and if there's ways that we could continue to break down these concepts more and make them more applicable to people that users that we're not thinking about currently, who could really benefit from it.
So let me just and to fill in on that. So we have it's just gone up to 10. We have 10 people that are viewing us live online. But hi, but the only person that has come in a way that could actually ask or give comments is Kevin, who is here on the thing. So I'd invite you, Kevin. Realizing you're probably on a phone, but if we do want to give you, like, you are the one who is here. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask them. And probably the thing to do is either flag by typing in the chat room, or at least coming off and using your video so I can at least see you and wave, and then I'll call on you to ask some more questions. So anyways, that said, we do have a good audience going, so we need to We need to deliver.
Okay.
In terms of
We can juggle.
We can juggle. In anything else in terms of learnings that you guys made that would be good for us to talk about?
I mean, I just shout out, like, Ruth Miller did the user research, really led the design of that, and so she came out with just an incredible document that we actually would love to share a version of with the wider community, because those are insights that I would love the feedback of everybody on. But one of the things that she discovered too was that the mailing list was really
those are insights that I would love the feedback of everybody on. But got it. Rohan, welcome.
Thank you. Sorry, I was getting feedback. Okay.
You are more than welcome. We just put you on mute just for now. We're continuing with a train of thought. We'll get to you in just a second. Thank you. Got it. Rohan, welcome.
Hi.
There we go. You're on mute, Rohan. Stay on mute.
He's saying something. I don't, in case we wanted to catch that. But so yeah, one of the things that we learned was actually, while so much of responsible data forums and responsible data community was centered around events, those were really resource intensive and kind of decreasing in the frequency. And so the mailing list actually ended up being the resource that people most often pointed to. And we wanted to put a lot more investment and, like, really prioritize that visually on the site, because although the events were so fantastic and so much came out of them, since there wasn't so much movement on events in recent years, it made the site feel like, and made the community feel like, more tranquil, or like there wasn't so much happening, when actually, if you were on the mailing list, you were constantly seeing conversations that were really interesting. So that was something that we learned, that we could do to kind of highlight the community as the resource and the mailing list as the resource.
Which is very cool. Just to say that Ruth's user document, the thing that she put together, is that online yet anywhere?
No, we used it as we went through the redesign process to inform, like, the user experience designs and the user interface designs and the writing. And then it also includes a lot of things that like were more about community management and governance that can't really be totally reflected on the website, but are things that are kind of ongoing processes. I wrote a little bit about them in the blog post on our website that was called Designing for the Not So Distant Future. But I would like to share those findings kind of more clearly and broadly at some point.
That's great. Well, what I so what I was going to invite is, because I'll be doing a blog post about this conversation, and I'd love to be able to link to that document and other stuff that's relevant for to point people to. So if you can give me those links later, that would be excellent.
Definitely.
Yeah. Is there anything else that's worth mentioning in terms of, like, what you guys learned? I'm sure you had tons.
I mean, I guess the thing I want to say about it is that there was so much great advice that came from the people that we spoke with, who are the community members and new folks to the community, and that we don't have time, maybe, or resources to implement them all right now. But I'm really glad that people were open and honest about things that could improve and where they saw the community going. And so, yeah, we didn't do it all, I guess is what I'm saying. But we like to see redesign processes as ongoing, and resources as kind of always available for reinvestment and reconsidering. So, which I think fits in with your network-centric manifesto as well.
Yes. Let me get to, and I want to get to that in just a second. But since Rohan has made the extra effort to come in on this channel, I think he's got some questions. So Rohan, let me invite you now. If you want to come off mute and ask your questions, that would be super helpful. And you're on mute, just so you know. Just
okay. How's that?
There you go. You fabulous.
Great. Nice. That's really this question that was raised about the content. I'm just doing some general research at the moment, mostly academic research on privacy issues. I'm just researching the incorporation of privacy issues, responsible data in privacy project research. And I was just wondering whether some of the reports that I'm reading, I think are obviously quite interesting, but I got the feeling that the academic copying using academic reports on the website wasn't popular. People weren't necessarily taking them in or reading them or appreciating them. Was there a way of doing summaries of some of these reports, I think, in the style of, in the way that New Scientist or Science reports new research on responsible data? Would that be something that the website would be able to do?
So it wasn't so much that people were not interested in reading academic articles that were featured on the site, but that the entire language of the site, like the about page, the home page, any kind of description of what the project was written with academic language. Okay. So there was no option for visitors to decide to engage with more academic content. It was already like an assumption that they spoke in a certain way and knew certain terminology. And that was what we were trying to break down.
I understand. So I misunderstood. Okay.
But what you're describing is something that we think is really important in the engine room, which is trying to find creative ways to share research and in more sustainable ways. So finding maybe like websites that were a little bit more well designed than a 200-page PDF or something, and trying to find new ways to communicate research findings to different audiences is really, great.
Okay, that's good. You also mentioned that the consensus seems to be that there's quite a lot of other organizations and other research going on. I mean, is there any way that perhaps you could provide some kind of lists or make them available or pointers to where we might find relevant research on responsibility?
Well, for starters, Twitter's hashtag has a lot of people who are in the community and talking about it. The website itself features a lot of resources from other places, and we just are finding a way to standardize it. So we'll link to something that an organization or individual created. So you can find resources from other groups on it. As far as like an official list, I think just being part of the mailing list and seeing who's participating there and what they're talking about is the best way to keep up to date.
That's great. Okay. I'm happy to like to carry on listening, but perhaps you better put me back on mute because it's about to get a bit noisy in here.
That will do, and thank you for that, Rohan. Really
thank you very much.
Thank you. And also just to say, I actually accessed another chat room, which is the live viewers are watching. So live viewers, if you do have additional questions, I can now see your questions if they come in there. But to say, Kristen Anton had a really good point in there, and that's saying it might be really helpful to include on the Responsible Data website that the listserv archive is a very rich collection of information. So, and also that is often something that we forget about lists, is that they are archived and people can go through them and all that. But that's probably a good point.
Thank you, Kristen. That's a good idea. Yeah, we talked about in the research, user research, also thinking about ways to make the archives more discoverable, or that information more discoverable, which is a kind of a big challenge, but something that might be worth thinking about for the future.
Great. Had started to mention the network-centric resources project that this is a part of. One of the things I wanted to make sure I asked you, we had distributed about 6 weeks ago network-centric resources lifecycle draft, and we're trying to get people to comment on, if that works for them as a framework and where they see themselves that are at. So the life cycle goes through preconception, conception, birth, youth, maturity, death, and then afterlife. And so just curious in terms of the life cycle, if that resonated with you at all, and if you saw a spot where you think where responsible data is now in terms of the life cycle.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've gone through from preconception to maturity and then back to preconception again, which maybe is now post-preconception or something, which is to say that we got to the point where we were there was investment in reinvesting in content that was deemed useful, new versions, reuse and modification of things. But then this redesign I kind of see as another preconception phase, which was trying to understand how the community works, what they're trying to achieve, like taking a step back again, and then trying to understand what the goal of the resource is. In this case, the resource is the platform, but then really the broader resource, as we mentioned earlier, is the community, and actually where they're discussing things. So we thought all about that, and I guess from preconception we went into wireframes, into the conception phase, and then I think we're just now on this like Ferris wheel of life cycle development.
Well, it's curious, and I think that's the bit, is like maybe I've got to figure out a better frame, but I think cycles, you know what I mean, are the thing here that's really key, in that we are, getting stuff out there, learning, going back, refining, learning, and all that, and the main purpose is, learning how to better support knowledge sharing within a community, and making that happen. So I appreciate that, and yeah, and actually one of the things that's had struck me recently in another conversation I was having was, if you think about your resource source as an organism, there might be parts of it that need to die, not the whole thing, but as that bit that I think you guys did was the learning of like what was valuable, learning about the content, right? Like some of it you killed off. Right, and part of that is both it wasn't serving the community, but also there's other bits or other places that might be existing that's doing it better, and having some knowledge about that.
Yeah, readjusting what is the value that this brings, how is it different from other communities, where are we stepping on toes, or where are we well spaced? And when I say we, I mean the responsible data community.
Yeah. And also just to say, we're getting there's more things in this chat room about curated archives from the site itself as being valuable to people. So something to note. And Jonas Sealis, who is watching over there, thank you very much for putting that in. But I think that it's interesting how that is. I think the other thing that you realize is how websites, as much as we try to make them a place where people can interact, it's like the more traditional places like email and places like that is where it happens, right? And so where the actual vibrancy and where the knowledge sharing is happening is on the list, right? And so these comments that we're getting on the suggestions and feedback is really valid. Like people want ways of connecting with knowledge that is happening or that has happened there, and it's not necessarily showing up on the website.
Yes, definitely resonates with me.
Cool. So is there people, just so people know, I am watching both chat rooms now. If you have any other questions, particularly if you're in the viewing mode, please feel free to get them out probably within the next 10 minutes so that we can make sure that we address them before the end of the session. But Maya, just curious in terms of what other things, since you've actually done the launch of the redesign, right, have you learned since you've gotten that out in the world?
Yes. Well, I wanted to be honest to say that we actually didn't set up any kind of formal feedback mechanism. So actually this question is a primer for like a reminder that that would probably be a really nice thing to do, to continue to put the feelers out there around how are people receiving the new site, honestly, and what are still like the wish list things that they want, knowing that that might be a longer term process of getting those things made. But yeah, we don't have a lot of like learnings. We got a lot of nice thanks and good feels from people on the internet, and I really appreciated that because I spent a long time working on it, and a lot of other people did, so it's always nice. But in terms of like more concrete feedback, like what we're asking for here, I don't have a lot of lessons learned, but I really hope to, and maybe Zara and I can start to think of a nice way to reach out and get that.
Well, it's also I think the thing too that we need to figure out with these sort of resources is also how do we make it easier for people to reach out to us, right, and let us know what their experiences is. And so, these points that are coming up in the chat room about like, having a cultivated version of the list, I think is something, you know what I mean? Like it's nice to get that. It's how do you get that kind of stuff without, I mean, these sessions are really valuable and super happy that this is coming out this way. But how do you set that up, right, so that you can get that in a more natural way as things come up?
Totally. Yeah. And it's about like prioritizing and trying to understand what are the needs that most people have, and then what are the would be really nice if, and what are aspirational things where the community actually wouldn't engage with it, but maybe down the line they could, and figuring that out is really hard, but I think worth it.
Good. So one thing you mentioned earlier in the chat, I'm curious about like what you guys are thinking. So where, where do you see the future of the responsible forum headed? One of the things that you had mentioned was possible another organization taking it on and stewarding it. And so, curious of where you guys see this all headed.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things we're working on is trying to understand like what a partner on the RD site means, and designing a process so that it's a useful tool for advocacy within organizations to demonstrate their commitment to RD, and just to try to understand what this ecosystem looks like and how we can best communicate it. And of course, like continuing to add bios of people and content from people to really showcase who is in the community. That was something I actually didn't mention, but there were basically no images of community members anywhere, and it's just such a great community and group of people, and we just wanted to finally get some faces up there and show like this is what we mean when we say the RD community. So that was a really nice thing to have out there, and we're going to continue to add more people. And then I guess beyond that, like I said, we could imagine handing over stewardship of the community to another organization, but we have to do a lot of work in building up these processes, so that we can hand over something that is actually practical and usable, much like I think other resources in the space are trying to figure out. So you don't just say, oh, here's a zip file with all of the assets for the website. Have fun managing the community. So making documentation on what's happened and what's going on would be great. And then just generally, it's really important for us space as stewards, and that we continue to just grow a diverse and inclusive community, which is welcoming to challenges and questions, and can provide space for people to express that. So that's kind of a big picture goal.
Yeah, no, and I think and to be totally transparent, or also to just say another place that Maya and I are putting some effort into is the Level Up community, and that is currently having the we're at a place where we need an organization to take stewardship of that resource, and we're trying to get over that little bit of the hill of making it all happen. And it's having all that documentation. The bits that we talked about at the beginning, like the governance stuff, is really, really critical. But then the whole thing of like the mechanics, right? When you've got a resource, like where is it? How does it work? What is it set up? What is maintenance like? How do you get contribution? Where are all these different pieces? That has to be documented. And then it's the bit of like, making sure that the community understands what that stewardship means, right? So, you along with the governance, you have to have that understanding with the community that, it's the engine room now, but it's going to be X down the line, and you have to make sure that people are okay with that. One of the things that I think is really beneficial about that model is, it's less about territoriality around developing resources, right? And more about supporting knowledge sharing within the sector, which is really, really important. And we're not going to get anywhere if we prevent that from happening. And that, expressed thing of like, we want this to move on. That does say to people, I think in a really strong way, that this isn't the engine room's thing, right? It is the community's thing. And that's a really good way of articulating that.
Yeah. And being a steward doesn't mean putting our stamp on things or leading the conversation. It usually means opening up a space for conversation and then taking a back seat and letting people decide where they want to take that. And so managing the infrastructure for us is great because that is the platform that allows the community to have that space.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is really understanding the capacity of the community, right? And making sure that it's the community doesn't get bogged down in the trying to take care of the resource, right? Like, because that's I think, and also understanding, like, people are going to come to your resource because they need stuff, they need knowledge, they need the expertise that is there on the resource. They're not necessarily coming because they need to take care of it, right? And so understanding that extra burden, but then also understanding that people might get value from stewarding and all that and making it available, and that might actually be incredibly beneficial for organizations. And I think the piece that's interesting to me also is like, obviously the responsible data thing, the responsible data community needs resources. So, a steward needs to be enabled to help find those resources. So fundraising, things like that, is not precluded, from this concept of stewardship. An organization that is stewarding can do fundraising in order to get the support, and should be able to do it, right? And so I think, figuring out how to enable that, and even that act of stewardship might be a capacity building thing for an organization. And, that should be allowed to happen. It should be okay for an organization to get, what I'm saying is to get a lot of benefit out of the stewardship thing.
Yeah, I think it's a nice relationship. It's not, everybody's getting something out of it. And the more groups that end up managing these things, I think the skills and the voices will change. And I think that will only make the community and the outputs more rich and interesting. So It can only kind of get better.
Yeah. And so, and just again, just to say, complete kudos to the engine room and all that for thinking that through and you know hope and trying to make that big picture thing happen, or enabling the big picture thing to be able to happen. That's
Thanks.
really great.
I'll take the kudos and then I'll send them back to everybody who participated and helped us. You know, gave their time to help us figure these things out and continues to contribute to the community. So thank you all.
And that is really important. We need to appreciate community members and community members' efforts for making it going and doing the hard work of sharing knowledge and all that within it. And that's what makes the responsible community so vibrant. So with that, do we have anything else, Maya, that we should talk about before we wrap this lovely conversation up?
I don't think so. I mean, just if you're new to this community, it's here for you. Go to the website and join the list if you'd like, or participate on Twitter, or read the resources and lurk, and you don't have to join any channels of communication. So just to say, take advantage of it.
Great. And also just to say that if you are wanting to figure out more about how to develop these kinds of resources with these principles and values that we've been talking about throughout the entire conversation, that's what the Network-Centric Resources Project is about. And I'd really appreciate it if you joined our network as well, if you're trying to figure that out. You can do that by going to the fabwriters.net, and you will see our work, Network-Centric Resources, and you can figure out how to get on the discussion list from there. So with that, I really just want to thank everyone so much for participating. Also to say that we do hold these online discussions monthly. And if you are working on a network-centric resource, like the responsible data, like the security education companion that EFF is doing, like Collaboratory that Herodox is working on, those types of resources. And if you want to share knowledge or use it as an opportunity to talk through and figure out some of your challenges, I'd love to host you. So get in touch. And like I said, if you're not part of the network, do join us. And now that I've said thank you to everybody, and thanks all of you that are viewing, and thank you, Maya, so much for the time and for putting all the effort into this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So just a reminder, this is going to be available on YouTube, and I'll be posting notes from the discussion along with the live recording on the Fab blog on the Fab Writers website, hopefully tomorrow, if I get a chance before the long weekend we have here in the UK. But with that, that's it. Thank you guys so much for viewing. Maya, thank you again for everything. I got it. Hope that we continue to have these great discussions, both on the responsible data list on the site and also within network-centric resources. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dirk. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.